Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Vorhies, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central, and I'm also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. Now, I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Tableau for sponsoring today's event. Tableau is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Now, today's webinar is entitled Creating a Thriving Culture of Data Analytics at EY, and that'll be presented by Tableau. But before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have one presenter who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of QA following the presentation. And today's event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's event. So I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, James Smith with Ernst Young. Now, James is an Assistant Manager, Data Analytics in the Financial Accounting and Advisory practice at EY. He supports clients' finance functions in becoming future-ready by making the most of their data and automating manual processes. Now, outside of work, he's a keen sports fan and is 1/3 of the team that runs the Sports Biz Sunday initiative in the Tableau and Twitter communities. So James, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, Ernst Young is a global leader in assurance, tax, transaction, and advisory services, and the need for data skills is more in demand than ever. So today's Data Science Central webinar will delve into Senior Data Analyst James Smith's journey, teaching fellow accountants and consultants to discover how to communicate data insights beyond Excel and PowerPoint. It'll cover the key challenges he faced, where and how he found success, and the importance of momentum. Now, on James' mission to convince people that data is for the many, not the few, he's learned a few things along the way. So today's webinar will provide a view into precisely what he's learned and how you can create a learning culture within your own organization. So James, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin just as soon as you're ready to go.
Thanks very much, Bill. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We'll be talking through how to create a thriving culture of working with data in your organizations, using some examples from where I've had successes and learnings on my own journey at EY. I've just returned from the Tableau conference in New Orleans, where I witnessed an excellent presentation on presentations by Andy Cockgreave, and was inspired by his use of his Bitmoji character to help get his message across. That's why the little guy in the bottom left will be joining us on our journey to data utopia. So I'm going to start with a big message, and my key message today is that analytics is accessible. So that means that it is for everyone. I truly believe that it is accessible to whoever you are, regardless of your background. The media does a terrific job of convincing us otherwise, using pictures of matrix-style code and robots at the top of their articles to convince us that it's this really complex thing that people can't get their heads around easily, is reserved for people that are really specialists in this area. But in my experience, analytics is accessible for people that don't necessarily come from a technological background. And so we're going to talk around why it's available for everyone to do. And one of the things that we've got to thank for that are companies like Tableau who bring data to people every day in a very easy and accessible fashion. We'll start with a brief agenda. We're going to break up the talk into the who, why, what, how, and what next of data. I've put in more slides with huge letters to mark when we're going to move on to a new section. We'll start with who. I'm going to start talking a little bit about myself. So By day, I work at EY, Ernst Young, as an assistant manager in one of our tech teams. I'm currently based in our Copenhagen office in Denmark, where I'm on a secondment until Christmas, and then I'll go back to our London practice. I am an ICAW, so that's the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales Chartered Accountant, and I was also a Tableau public featured author. So every quarter, Tableau will announce a set of featured authors from around the world, and they'll feature them on their Tableau public site. Outside of EY, I also run a little data visualization business called SportsCord, and that is all about getting loads of sports data together, putting it into visualizations that really identify the stats, but in a nice, beautiful way. And then I sell little wall prints on the side using my Etsy shop. So I'm a huge sports fan, and I try and integrate the fact that you can use data that you're interested in, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sport, but this is something that's been really important to me when I've been learning these new skills, is that using data that interests you yourself is going to make the process of learning this kind of stuff much easier. What about EY? So EY is a global professional services firm and a member of the Big Four, whose logos you'll see across buildings in many major cities around the world. It was founded in 1989 through the merger of Ernst & Winnie and Arthur Young, and it's rebranded relatively recently, I think in 2012, from Ernst & Young to EY. So this is our current logo, and as I said, part of the Big Four. So what exactly do the Big Four do? Most large firms will follow a relatively similar pattern, but will name their various service lines slightly differently. So up there in the top left, you've got assurance, and that is mainly made up of the audit practice. It also might contain other bits of assurance that aren't necessarily audit. So at EY, we've got a climate change sustainability department. We've got a forensic accounting that looks into fraud detection and that kind of stuff. And then you've got your tax function, which will mainly provide tax advice and support, advisory, which is our consulting arm, and transactions, which will look into mergers and acquisitions and business valuation, that kind of stuff. So the relative size of the different service lines, you've got assurance there, which makes up the majority of the business, and this will be relatively similar in other big professional services firms. So the rest of the Big Four will have their bread and butter will be the audit work, and then you've got your other service lines that are really supporting that. But this is a picture that has been changing quite dramatically recently. So a lot of the times the consulting work and the transactions work is the real growth areas of the business, and that will be a trend that you'll see going into the future as well. And if you're interested in knowing just how big the Big Four are, this is a nice word cloud of all of the Fortune 100 companies, so the biggest companies in the US. The words here have been sized by their revenue, and they've been coloured by who audited them. So all that grey you see are companies that have been audited by the Big Four, and if you look very closely up there in the top right-hand corner, you can see the Energy Transfer Equity, which is audited by Grant Thornton. So that's the one in the 100 that's not audited by the Big Four, and it's a very similar story if you look at the FTSE 100, which is the 100 largest companies in the UK, and 99 of those are also audited by the Big Four. With I think it's BDO that is the one that doesn't audit, isn't being audited. Similar story with revenue. So here we've got a graph showing a tree map showing EY's revenue just next to the next 6 biggest companies outside of the Big Four. So you can replace EY with any of the other Big Four companies. It just shows the scale of how big the Big Four are relative to the other companies that are playing catch up at the moment. We'll move on to why. Why is data, what I call data literacy, so important, not just at EY, but for firms around the world, regardless if you work in accountancy, consultancy, marketing. And the crux of this is that a lot of people will spend a lot of time using Excel and PowerPoint in their daily jobs, especially when your work is all around numbers, presenting. These have been really, really great tools historically for doing exactly that. But we're reaching a point at which the inherent limitations of what Excel and PowerPoint can do are really coming to light. So, for example, Excel, you can only have up to just over 1 million rows of data. Now, sounds like a lot, but with the amount of information and the data that is flowing in today's world, that could be a pretty large limitation for a lot of companies. And even before you reach that million row level, you're going to start hitting some performance limitations that make it very difficult. So if you've ever experienced an Excel file crashing, then you know where I'm coming from. There's also the fact that analytics is very exciting. It's something that's there, it's new, there's a bit of a buzz around it. And by learning a little bit about how to use data, how to present it, how to analyze it in a different way, it sets you apart. And that might be whether you're very happy in your company and you're trying to push for a promotion and work your way up within a company, or it might be that you are looking to move, and this is a skill that will look really great on your CV. And most of all, I actually genuinely find analytics and using data enjoyable. It's an interesting task. You get a lot out of it. So to help me explain why data is important for everyone, I'm going to use a few examples. So I'd like you to introduce you first to Alice. So Alice, she's an accountant. She is a master at using Excel. She lives in a world of pivot tables and she dreams in VLOOKUPs. So you can see here a very fancy pivoted 3D reverse ice cream cone chart. I made up that name, but you can see it's showing some great financial performance. There you can see the grapes, bananas, and apples doing terrifically well. The issue Alice has is that she spends so much time working in Excel, working with her data, that she's kind of forgotten the importance of actually presenting it in a meaningful and understandable way. So looking at this chart, you can't actually work out, you even lose the actual names of the things on the axis. General rule of thumb, 3D is an awful way to present data because it's so hard to understand the depth, especially those ones at the back. You just can't relatively understand what's going on. Next up, we've got Craig. So Craig is the king of PowerPoint. His decks are awesome. They inspire people from around the world. People come from far and wide to witness Craig using his hotkeys to align boxes and project plans and manipulate shapes into some wonderful, wonderful infographics. But the thing about Craig is that he hates using spreadsheets, and he's really not very good at working with numbers. He's great when it comes to change management and designing beautiful roadmaps for success like this one here. But he really wishes there was an easy way of getting numbers into a place where he can present that information in a nice way and have some interesting analysis alongside it. Finally, we get to Derek, and Derek is a data scientist. So he lives for data science. He lives for machine learning, AI, regression, you name it, Derek is your guy. He literally eats R for breakfast and munches on C# for an afternoon snack. The thing that Derek struggles with is that he just can't understand why people don't get it when he starts to explain the maths behind his latest algorithm. He speaks to people at lunch and he chats through some of the k-means regression and the clustering that he's doing there. And it really frustrates him when people that he's working with just don't understand what's going on. They look at him in blank faces. So what brings this all together? In my view, if we work with numbers, if we work with presentation, we're all data people at the end of the day. So you've got your accountants. They may be specialists in the accounting regulations. We're looking at some of the IFRSs, the accounting standards. You've got your consultants. They may be experts in change management, in processes, process mapping. And you've got your data scientists they're your experts in predictive modeling, the AI world, machine learning world. But they're all working with data in one way or another. And I believe that all three of those different categories, those different professions, could be enhanced by a basic understanding, which I'm going to be calling data literacy. So That sweet spot right in the middle of our Venn diagram there is data literacy. So being able to work with numbers, being able to analyze data, being able to present that data, make it understandable for the people that aren't necessarily the experts in their field. So I'm not saying that we don't still need our experts, because we absolutely do in each of these areas, but as well as being an expert, why not be able to present information in a nice, easy to understand for people that aren't experts? And the rest of us that can't claim to be experts in one particular field, but are generalists and work with data day to day, there's also a huge world of improvement that people can do day to day to what they're doing within their jobs. Move on, we'll talk about what exactly is data analytics. So I've spoken a little bit about accounting and consulting and data in general. We're going to move on to exactly what data analytics is. So it's incredibly broad, data analytics. I sit in a little department called Financial Accounting Tech, and even within that, it's fairly broad. We've got people that specialize in IT audit. We've got people that specialize in processes and large systems. And my little special niche is data analytics. And when you really delve into that, it opens up a whole extra web of what is data analytics. So we've got 6 things coming out here, and I've tried to condense it into a relatively easy and labeled format. Up there in the top left, we've got data visualization. And that's all about the communication of information. It's charts, but not just charts. It's understanding what the best chart for the data is and how to show information in a way that's going to be understood well. Then you've got data integration, and that's all about getting data from different sources. It's pulling it together. It's extracting, transforming, and loading. So that's ETL. You'll often hear that called. Then you've got data storage. And that is whether it's on a server within your own company, a physical server, or more often these days it's on a cloud-based server, so within Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. And that's all about storing data in huge data warehouses, data lakes, and pulling on it when you need to. Data science, we've already mentioned data science, and that's kind of the more advanced world of applying statistics, mathematics, theory to data to gain knowledge that isn't already there. So it might be doing predictive modeling, it might be doing clustering, and using some really advanced techniques to understand what data can tell you. Then you've got data modeling, and that is where you've got, it's all about defining the relationships between your data. So you might have 2 different data sets, both of them about customers. And in one data set, you've got all of the customers' addresses, all of their information. And then in another data set, it is a big data set about all the sales that you've got for your company. So it's creating that link, creating any extra columns that are interesting, that might add a bit of value to that information. And then finally up there in the top right, we've got data strategy. And this isn't necessarily the hands-on data work. It's more about in the leadership team, it's defining what your strategy is around using data to drive decisions in your business. It might be about how you govern your data. So who should see what part of the data? If you're in a big organization and you've got different regions around the world, then maybe right at the top of that organization, you want to see the information at the highest level, but then you only want different regions of the world. So the Americas, you might want to see one part. The EMEA or Europe, you might want to see one part, and so on. So I would recommend focusing on these 2 that I've just highlighted to start off with. So that's data visualization and data integration. I'm in no way discrediting any of those others, but I believe that these 2 are the easiest to get your heads around relatively quickly. They're the most accessible. So visualization, I think most people in the working world will have done something around visualization, whether that is simply making a chart in Excel, making a chart in PowerPoint, or putting numbers into an infographic. That's visualization. Integration, that's pulling information into your Excel. So it might be copy and paste. We'll go through a couple of examples in a minute, but these are the two that I think are the most accessible, and I would recommend starting out on your data journey, getting to know these two first. So I put what was it, data integration, what was it? I do believe that in many organizations, this is still what is it? And when I talk about integration, I mean you've got two spreadsheets. You copy Control-C from one of them. You paste Control-V into the other one. Maybe you transpose the data. You use pivot tables. You filter your data. And the VLOOKUP, which is extremely commonly used in my place of work in some cases. But this is what data integration is at the moment. It's pulling information from different sources into a single place. So what is, in some cases, already happening? What is data integration now, and what do I see it being in the future? It's all around joining data in smarter ways. So whether that's pulling it through a very easy-to-use program like Ultrix, so that makes it very easy for people to use it without having to have much of a coding or a scripting background. It allows you to pull information into a workflow, which you can then export, and every time you've got the same process, you can run it through that workflow. It's modeling the data, structuring it into different ways, and more often than not now, there's a lot of value to be gained from what's known as unstructured data. So where you've got free text, it might be social media data, it might be blogs, journals, and you've got a huge amount of information, but it's not in a nice structured table like you would see in Excel. So there is a huge world of kind of going into some of the scripting languages, so R and Python, to pull out the insight from that data. So it's creating a connection between some of your regular data and pulling information that isn't so readily accessible. What about data visualization? So I've flashed up on the screen here a wonderful 3D pie chart. I've already mentioned that making anything 3D is difficult. This one in particular, the 3D pie chart is a legendary thing in the data visualization community, because if you look at it like this, you've got that front lip there that is making the front of the chart appear bigger. And because when you're looking at a pie chart, your brain and your eye is trying to calculate the angles and the proportions around that circle, because you've suddenly made the front of it bigger, the chart no longer works. So a warning, stay away from 3D pie charts, or indeed pie charts in general, because a simple bar chart where you're looking at the length of the bar is much easier for the eye or the brain to understand than using a pie chart where it is trying to calculate the proportions of the circle using the angles. So hundreds of charts are used. People love presenting data because it speaks for itself. Using a picture instead of a number makes it much easier for the audience to understand what you're talking about. But so many times you see poorly conceived charts, things that are just very simple, they're very basic. It's basically file, insert chart, and then up pops the chart. Maybe you'll change a few colors around, but then nothing else. And the defaults that you get in Excel and PowerPoint aren't really geared up to what is known as the best-in-class visualization theory, which is all about making it clear, making it very readable and understandable, and therefore you can present your information quickly and get your point across. So what is data visualization today? We talk about something called visual analytics, and this is something that Tableau has made really easy for me personally, and I've seen it work so well in organizations where you put your information, so you've got a spreadsheet or you've got a database, and you import that into Tableau, and you set out on your journey of exploring what is in that data. And at the start, you might have a few questions yourself, and you might start by setting about answering those questions. But then you get to a point where you find something completely new, and that is exploring your way through the data to understand what's in it. And there might be information that you had no idea about, but because you can see it visually and explore that data, it really pulls out the interesting stuff for you then. And we also talk about storytelling with data. So that's presenting back to someone. Once you've done your exploring and you found your story, it's presenting it back to someone in a very easy easy to understand way, just like you would be telling a story. So that's visual analytics. So we've talked a little bit now about what exactly this is, and we're now going to talk about how you can embed this culture of data analytics within your organization. So I've put up here 4 of the key things that I have experienced at EY that have been really useful to creating that culture. We're going to start with the community. These are in no particular order. You would hope that people would be engaged from day one, and you would hope that momentum would start building from day one as well. I flashed up a picture of the Data Vikings. So I mentioned earlier, I'm currently based in Copenhagen, and I'm on a secondment here for 3 months. And as part of that, I'm traveling around the Nordics to Norway, to Sweden, to Finland, and trying to create this big community of people using Tableau, using Ultrix, and just understanding data in a better way. And so we've got this fun name called the Data Vikings, but I'll come on to that a bit later. To start off with, when we started talking about this, we thought, okay, what we really need is a curriculum. And when I talk about curriculum, I'm talking about going through online learning courses. I'm talking about finding those really good, useful courses on the big course websites, so Udemy and Coursera. And we found actually that this was a tremendous waste of time for the actual people that started out on our community. So it was useful for us for getting an understanding of what was out there. But for most people, once we actually kicked off and started working with this community, that was pretty useless. We didn't use it much at all. So you also need to think about finding the leaders that are going to drive your community. And this is particularly important because a lot of creating this community is going to be done through personal relationships and the general enthusiasm and passion for the subject of the people that are going to be running it. So pick your first leaders very wisely. If it's not yourself listening today, then someone might have popped into your head when I talked about this. It's people that are really enthusiastic, almost too keen in some ways, but people that will get something happening and get people talking about it. And I mentioned there the Data Vikings. Find a really great name and a brand. So the first time we ran this scheme, we launched it and we called it the Data Ninjas. So one of the partners at EY came to me and said, I want you to create this community, and we're going to be calling it the Data Ninjas. And at first I thought, ugh, I'm going to cringe every single time I say that. And to be honest, I still do cringe when I say the Data Ninjas. But because it's a bit different and because it's quirky and a bit fun, people remember it and it sticks in their mind. So have something fun. You can call it the Data Ninjas yourself. Have something relevant. So given that I'm in the Nordics, I felt that the Vikings was an appropriate thing to call it. But yeah, make sure that you have something fun. Maybe create a logo like I've done with the Vikings, and we had a Ninjas one before that, so that you've got this brand around what you're doing. Next step is the first followers. So the way that we did this, we gave people an option. You could either apply to the scheme, and then you would be selected based on your application. In another department, we hand selected the people based on who had been really enthusiastic before we'd even started mentioning the scheme. So maybe there's people that you know out there that have come and spoken to you or have shown a particular interest in this. That enthusiasm is by far the most important trait that you're going to have to show when you get started. So there is no data experience required at this point. This is all about a big community forming to learn something that is relatively accessible. It's about getting to a level that you're comfortable with in hopefully a relatively short period of time that will help you do your day-to-day job a lot better. On to liftoff. So this is the point at which all the planning that you put into starting your scheme, this is where it becomes live. So maybe send a few emails out before you get started and get the buzz going, and make sure that that first meeting that you have is in person. That's a really important one. People can often hide behind Skype. You're not as engaged when you're on Skype. If you've got people in a room, you can gauge their reactions. You can passionately speak, and if you're not a great personal speaker, then you can do it in a one-to-one basis and incite a bit of enthusiasm that way. And then outline what you're going to be doing for the next few months. So in our case, we had quite a packed schedule in the first couple of months because we knew we wanted to really hit the ground running and get people engaged. So we had Andy Kirk, who is a data visualization expert, come in and do a course with us. We had spoken to Tableau already, and we used that relationship that we've got with them to have a couple of what they're calling awareness days, awareness sessions. So we actually went to the Tableau headquarters in London, and they put on a really great introduction to Tableau, which you could visibly see people got excited that you could do so much in such a short space of time. And it was almost like an epiphany where they've been using Excel for so long, and you can see as soon as you put that information into Tableau and start playing around with it, it becomes so much more visibly exciting to use and start exploring that data. And then you come to keeping the community going. So this is the point that it's kind of an inflection point where you've got to a stage where you've got your community, it's running along nicely. The community has grown, so you've got people that have heard about the brand, they've heard about the Data Ninjas. They ask, what's that? Can I join in? Can I be a part of this? So your community will start to change shape. It won't just be those 25 or 20 or so initial users that you've got. It'll start to become en masse. So the feeling then really changes, because whereas before it's kind of tight knit, it's people know each other on one-to-one basis. In a big international company like EY, where you've got people that are dialing into the calls from all across the world. So we had people calling in from America. We had people calling in from the Middle East, from Germany, from Holland. You can't plausibly have everyone in a room because it's just not possible. So the shape of that community starts to change, and it's really difficult to know how to keep everyone engaged as you go forward. You'll find out that some of those initial people, maybe they'll have got to a stage where they feel like they can drop off. They don't need to take as much of a part of it anymore. So I would recommend, once that starts to happen, change the roles around. So your first followers, the early people in the community, get them to take over some of the leadership roles, because you won't be able to shoulder all of the burden yourself. Get those people that are at the start to come in and take on maybe little subgroups. So maybe you give people a different region, and that will keep that community going. So next we'll talk about challenges. The makeover is the big challenge that I think we put to good use, and is probably the biggest one that's out there in the community at the moment. So the fundamental idea of what the makeover is, you provide a data set, and this could be on absolutely anything. I would recommend making it interesting to start off with. So maybe you could use something like, we had a look at some TripAdvisor reviews. There was a colleague of mine going on holiday to Greece recently. So we sat down and we pulled data on TripAdvisor reviews for all the different restaurants across Europe, and then we went through the process of targeting in on Greece, having a look at different types of food restaurants, and then she was able to create a story around that and had a great time in Greece, hopefully. But yeah, so you get this interesting data set. You give your people that you're working with some advice on what they're looking for. So maybe you take an approach where you've got a question at the start of it and you really narrow down on that question. So some of the best pieces of work we've seen have come out of that approach. Or you could say, I want to have a look at this data set as a whole so that I can really visualize what it's all about. So those are some of the approaches that you could take. So once they've done that, they have to send all of their submissions back into a central point. So that might be Yammer or Slack or Workplace or whatever you use in your organization, or it could just be them sending in their visualizations or their pictures of the visualizations to a central point, and that might be just one email. And then you can really provide feedback. You do a big review session, basically, where you put all of the submissions into one place. You go through them one by one, and that really allows people to have a look at what other people have done, and also when it gets to your turn, you can get that feedback from the people that are running the scheme. So that worked really well with us. A couple of examples of where that has been done on a slightly bigger scale. So the biggest one out there is the Makeover Monday, which is run by Tableau Zen Masters Andy Kriebel and Eva Murray. And they recently released a book that has been published and is available now to buy. So they do exactly the same concept. They release a data set every Monday, and it is on all kinds of things. There's not really a theme I don't see running through them. They do data sets on absolutely everything. So that's a really good one to get involved with. If you are particularly interested in sport, then more recently, myself and two others, so Simon Beaumont and Spencer Balke in the US, set up a similar kind of thing. We've got a monthly challenge which is all around a relevant sports theme. So our most recent one was actually on the Ryder Cup, and before that we've done information on the Football World Cup when it was around the time of the World Cup and the start of the Formula One season. So again, if you're not interested in sports and you're interested in something else, so food, wine, whatever it is, find information that is really interesting to a lot of people and use that as your data set. Then it comes to showcasing that work. So when you pull it all back into a single place, sharing it with other people so that the people that have actually created the visualizations get recognition for them, and B, they can understand what other people's thought processes were, what the stories were. And just it's really nice to see what everyone's different takes on that data set was. You might want to offer a reward. So, for example, we had the Tableau conference in London in July this year, and for the 3 preceding months, we actually managed to get a budget to send some people off to the Tableau conference. So once we had done the makeovers, we allowed other people to vote on them, and then the top 2 from each month were able to go to the conference. And very quickly, this was an example, a really nice case study of what came out of the monthly makeover. So in April, we did the gender pay gap because that was something that came out, and every company in the UK now has to report their gender pay gap. So we took that data set and we provided it to the community. And they came back with this, which was showcased at one of our client events, and people at the client event really enjoyed it. And then subsequently to that, it was actually selected to be Tableau's Viz of the Day. So every day they'll have a new Viz of the Day which highlights some great work from the Tableau community. And this came out of the monthly makeover at EY and made it up to the Tableau Viz of the Day. So next I'm going to talk about momentum, and we've got a short video. I apologize now that it is pretty shaky. The quality of the video is awful, but try and ignore that and listen to what the guy's saying, because it's really important, the leadership lessons that you can get from this case study of momentum.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with the crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So you take guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut, and it's not 2 nuts. 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers, because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit. But you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
All right then. Apologies once again for the quality of that video, but hopefully you got the idea. So we're going to have a look at how to apply that first follower scheme to your community. So we spoke about your first followers a bit earlier, so that initial group. So make sure to get them on board quickly. Their enthusiasm and kind of the word of mouth spreading of how things are going and how exciting it is going to be really useful for getting that snowball rolling down the hill. Make sure that you encourage sharing, so you can see other people when they started to get involved, more people are interested. So if you're sharing your visualizations, you're sharing case studies of where things have worked really well, then that's going to get more and more people involved. And eventually you'll get to the stage where you're getting random emails every day saying, what is this Data Ninja scheme? How can I be a part of it? And then the people that are on the edges of this and people in the out crowd will start to join in. So at that point, it's very, very important to make sure that you stick to your core purpose of what you're doing, because it's very easy to slip into something other than what you're trying to do through your community. So just remember to keep on track and that this is all about getting everyone involved. And just remember also that this isn't dancing on a hillside without your top on. It's actually getting people involved in something that most people will already have heard about and be very excited about. So hopefully your job should be suitably easier than that lad on the side of a hill. Finally, we're going to talk through engagement. So this is all about the importance of getting the power of in-person. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that it's very easy to hide behind a Skype meeting. You stick yourself on mute, you sit there, and you don't want to be the one that just pipes up on the call when you're talking. So get people in a room. It's much harder to hide in a room. Make sure that you're inclusive, get people talking, maybe have a few socials so they get to know the community on a level outside of work. I mentioned earlier that it was really useful going to the Tableau headquarters, and that set us apart as people actually going to hear from the experts talk about what they're doing. And then once you've started to get your community going and people know each other, then you can start doing the slightly more practical Skype sessions. So once you've started doing, for example, using how to use Tableau, then you can maybe do an introductory session on how to use Python. And you can start to do introductory sessions on other things or follow-up sessions through Skype. Another way of generating engagement is through something that I heard about at the Tableau conference, which is called skill belts. So I imagine these used to be kind of like a scout's sash or a guide sash. where you can put your badge for doing particularly well at a different thing. So at EY, we've got the EY badges, which have been tremendously successful. They're all about generating engagement on future-focused skills. So you can get a bronze, a silver, a gold, or a platinum badge, depending on your level of expertise. And you need to show 3 different components. You need to show that you've gone out and actually learned some of the subject matter. You need to show that you are employing what you've learned on an engagement. And you need to be able to give back to that community. So that's stuff like the monthly makeover and sharing what you're learning with other people. And once you've got one of these badges, then you can then put it onto social media. So you can put it on LinkedIn, where it will stay and it's a badge of your accomplishment. Or internally, you can maybe add them to your email signature so that people know that you've actually spent time to go out of your way and learn a new skill. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the resistance, as I call them at the moment. And these are the people, they might be people that just disregard it completely. They might be the people that have really good intentions to start it, but lack the time or the drive to see it through. So we're going to go through a few examples of that. So finding the time is probably the biggest enemy to change you're going to face. Here are a few quotes that you might start to hear. Obviously, they're slightly exaggerated, but you might start to hear things like, oh yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. I've blocked out some time next week when things quieten down. And, oh, sorry, I've been pulled into some essential client work. Now, obviously, client work comes first. That is what makes the business run. But people can't be busy all the time. For starters, it's not good for your health. So you need to be able to convince people that by making time to learn something new now, that maybe in a few weeks' time or a few months' time, exactly the same task that has made them so busy will become easier and they can do a better job on it in half the time. So what can you do to counter this? My first piece of advice is to become a grade A pest. And that means that you have to keep on bothering people until they make the time. So it might be that you drop them a random Skype message during the day, just how they're getting on with their learning. Or maybe you stop up alongside them and check how they're getting on with their recent Tableau assignment or their makeover. And this will mean by kind of making it personable, people will start to feel more of an obligation to at least make an effort to put some time aside to learning. And to be completely clear, it isn't any kind of form of blackmail. It's simply just giving them a nudge towards spending a bit more time out of their schedule to doing something that will ultimately help them out in the long run. Second one is to make it fun. One of my biggest messages is, and I've spoken about this several times, is to make it interesting by using interesting data. For me, that was sports data. For my colleague, that was finding data on restaurants in Athens. So whatever you can see people are interested in, maybe it's a relevant news story at a time, but make the data interesting. You might want to add a touch of competition. So I've already mentioned those Tableau conference tickets. They were fairly expensive for us, but we thought it was something that was really worthwhile to do. And you can do, more recently, we created a database library. So we got tons of information books, and there's loads of them out there, some really informative books. And now the winners of our monthly makeover can win one of those books from the library to take home. Another big reason for non-participation is fear. So in this case, it is fear of change, or fear of failure, or fear of leaving that very comfortable world of Excel and PowerPoint. So here's a few more quotes that you might expect to encounter from people as they battle with getting started on their data journey. And your job as the person running the community is to help people really escape from their comfort zone and convince them that there is a better way to do things. So part of this is being really, really supportive. It's creating an environment in which there is no judgment over other people's work. You just got to remember and convince people that people will learn at their own speeds, and people will also spend different amounts of time learning. So just remember that it's not a competition in that there isn't a tiered number of places that are available to be good at data analytics. Everyone can be good at data analytics, and people will take time different amounts of time to get to a point where they are at that level. And what about the people that claim to be non-techies? So as millennials, which I am one of, it can be difficult to comprehend not growing up surrounded by computers and the internet, smartphones. But many people actually adopted technology. So hence the quote from Bane from Batman here. Some people were born in it, some people have grown up with it. I'm not sure I believe this. I think it's a matter of actually convincing them to be able to use data in a smarter way, because the tools like Tableau are so intuitive to use once you actually pick them up. It's comparable to looking at Excel or PowerPoint for the very first time and thinking, what do all these buttons do? But because it's accessible and because it's all click and drag to get to a reasonable level, and then once you've got to that level, maybe you want to stop there and you're doing a perfectly good at your job. Maybe you want to develop some of the more advanced techniques, and both of those are kind of catered within that. So what happens next? We're drawing to a close now. I'm just going to run through a few points that will hopefully be helpful for people to take away. So point one, it's a fairly big one, a fairly obvious one. Go away and start creating that culture of data analytics in your own firm today. I don't pretend to be the absolute authority on this, so there's going to be tons of people that have tried and failed at different aspects of this. So reach out to these people, find out what worked for them, what didn't work for them, but also you're going to experience things that work for you and don't work for you. So it's a learning curve for yourself. So make sure that you're reaching out to the people that have done it before, get advice, and then you have to understand that you're learning as well at the same time. Make sure it's inclusive, so fight that resistance. Make sure that people aren't always giving you excuses. Check up on them, encourage them, make it very inclusive for people. And one way of doing that is by making it nice and fun, keeping people engaged by using interesting data sets, adding a bit of a competitive spirit to it, maybe taking stuff outside of work and having socials, that kind of way, to get that community really nicely gelling. And most of all, enjoy yourself. So if you're the one that's going to be out there creating this culture of analytics in your firm, then it's going to be pretty useful for you. You're going to learn a lot, obviously, about what you're good at and what you're not good at. If you're the one that's actually teaching some of the tools, then you're going to learn a lot about how much you know about those tools, and often that will come as a bit of a shock. You'll have to go away and really prep up on how to use some of these tools. So with that, we will draw to a close. Thank you very much for listening. I put my contact details there, so if you enjoyed it or if you've got any feedback, then feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. That's @SportsCord. My email there, I'm actually the 12th J. Smith at EY. I've been cursed with a very, very popular name, unfortunately, but there's my email in case you've got any questions. So with that, I believe it is over to Bill, and he will go through a couple of questions.
Well, James, thank you for that great and interesting presentation. Yeah, too bad about the common name. But we'll get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. Had a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. So during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for James if you'd like to get a hold of him following today's event. So let's get started. James, the audience was quick to understand that this is really a deep change in culture that you're trying to create, and obviously not something that happens quickly, particularly in terms of your momentum point. Are there particular quick wins that we should start with or look for?
Yes, certainly. So, yeah, you're right that this isn't something that is going to happen overnight. These things do take change, and even from starting out and getting that initial group of first followers together, these things can take a long time. So something that I found very effective right from the start is just teaching people the very basics of how to visualize something correctly. So you can do this in a presentation yourself. There is loads of resources out there. Take a chart from your organization and give it a makeover yourself in front of people. So It might be a simple bar chart that you've generated out of Excel. And then it's about going through the process of decluttering that chart, taking away the unnecessary grid lines or the axes, and making that chart really tell the story of the data. So everyone uses charts in their day-to-day job, and having effective charts and effective visualizations can really make it easier to have a good discussion around what is in that data.
Well, James, thanks. That makes perfect sense. The audience really liked the video, as did I. And the question is, is there a particular type of person that I should target for my first followers? How do I get that first person to dance?
So to get your first person to dance, I would try and go for people that have the trait of enthusiasm and passion. So people that are actually wanting and are interested in learning about this. And I'd make it very clear that having any experience with data is not a prerequisite. So it can be someone that has just started working with it, someone who has no idea, someone who is very good at it. It doesn't really matter as long as they're enthusiastic and they can show that kind of will to learn and push themselves out of their comfort zone. So creating that group of first followers is all about finding those people. Maybe they're people that have reached out to you personally beforehand, or you've identified as having a bit of a spark for learning and picking new things up quickly.
Oh, great guidance. Thanks. Now, the audience spotted, back in your presentation, you talked about, I think it was 6 different areas in data analytics, and you focused us on visualization and integration. But what about the other areas? Have you got some guidance for us on how to make folks move forward in those other areas?
Yeah, so I chose them integration and visualization on purpose because I strongly believe that they are the most accessible to pick up from a point of zero knowledge. So there's no discredit on any of those other 4 because they are extremely important parts of analytics. But I think having that base knowledge, and what I referred to as data literacy a couple of times, that's about understanding how to work with data in its most common sense. So getting information into a single place and understanding that information through the use of visualization. So that's why I chose visualization and integration. Once you've got that base, then maybe you can start to build on that by looking into some of the other areas. So we had data science, and that's you wouldn't necessarily start with that because some of the techniques are more grounded in a large theory of statistics, mathematics, and some of the concepts around data science can be a bit more difficult to pick up if you don't know much about some of the other more basic topics. So, and also once you've got to a reasonable level of data science, then you're still going to be able to, you still want to be able to visualize it in a nice way. So they complement each other. Where you've got some of the other ones, I think there was data modeling. That one is relatively similar to the data integration, so that might be a nice step once you've nailed that integration part. Strategy sits out a little bit on its own because it's not necessarily about the hands-on doing of data. It's more about leadership and defining that strategy. So once you've really cracked down on those 2, I think there's a huge space for actually developing into and specializing in the different areas of analytics.
And find the folks that are enthusiastic. Love that point. Well, James, thank you. Great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions today that weren't answered, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to James and the Tableau team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for November 28th, that's our next DSC webinar, which is transforming third-party data into actionable insights. Also, remember today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions. A special thanks again to Tableau for their sponsorship, and particularly our speaker today, James Smith, for his insights into today's topic. This is Bill Vorhies. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on November 28th. Have a great day.